just hit it once or twice. Okay, the second meeting of the Kentucky Housing Task Force is called to order. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Carpenter. Senator Deneen. Here. Senator Higdon. Senator Neal. Senator Smith. Representative Kleins.
Here.
Representative Decker.
Present.
Representative Holloway.
Here.
Representative McPherson.
Here.
Representative Watkins.
Present.
Co-Chair Mills.
I'm here.
Co-Chair Witten.
Here. Great. And are there any guests that the members would like to recognize? It's Representative Decker.
I have a friend and who currently is with the Kentucky Bankers Association, Billy Wade from Shelby County, and I wanted to welcome him here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. The first agenda is to approve the minutes. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
So motion is, we need a voice vote for approved. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is approved. Okay, we're going to get right to it. We've got a really exciting but full agenda. So if the first guest could come, the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, come to the table, introduce yourself, and get right to it.
Chair, thank you for having us, Kentucky Chamber, here today. As this pulls up, my name is John Hughes. I'm Director of Public Affairs at the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. Let's see.
John, if you could pull your mic up just a little bit.
Is that better?
Thank you.
Is this better? Yes. Perfect. Okay, so again, John Hughes, Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. The Kentucky Chamber, as the premier business advocacy association in Frankfort, and a couple years ago, we really got involved in housing, the housing discussion. We partnered with the Home Builders Association of Kentucky to really study the current housing situation across the Commonwealth. So for this presentation, I'll walk through what we learned about the connection between the housing and economic growth. Second, I'll provide a snapshot of Kentucky's current housing challenges. And third, I'll offer a couple policy solutions. This is relatively new, again, for the Kentucky Chamber. Once we began in 2023, we started hearing from chamber members and community leaders across the state, and housing it became a serious problem. To take a closer look, we performed this study. The process involved the people closest to the issue. We surveyed more than 100 community leaders across 6 regions of the state, hosted regional listening sessions, and reviewed academic research and economic data to get a full picture of Kentucky's housing challenges. And here's what we learned. The group was posed this question: if a major economic announcement of 1,000 jobs was announced in your community tomorrow, do you think your region could sustain or be positioned to solve this demand? Of those people surveyed, 90% of the folks said they could not. A huge, huge issue. Do you think housing is holding Kentucky's economy back, an opportunity in your community? 66% said that it is. One of the problems is more than half of a century ago were when Kentucky's infrastructure was built. Kentucky is building fewer and far houses than today. This graph shows here that it is sometimes 4.5 times the economic or median household income for a price of a home. This here shows the shortage is continuing to grow. Since 2008, a lot of folks have not recovered from building more houses. This slide here shows that for adequate growth, we'll need to build 300,000 units over the next 30 years to maintain a healthy balance, or to maintain a healthy functioning housing market by the year 2025. If we're optimistic and aiming for moderate growth that Tennessee has seen, we'll have to build 500 million homes over the next couple of years. The chart to the right there shows that there have been fewer permits being issued since 2008. It's been on a 45% decline. The good news is we are starting to go in the right direction. Last year, the General Assembly showed tremendous leadership by launching this housing task force, which brought together voices from every corner of the state: builders, bankers, city leaders, workforce advocates, and more. You passed key legislation like House Bill 321, which helped address regulatory barriers to new development. Senate Bill 25, which tackled zoning, flexibility, and innovative financing. These actions show that this General Assembly understands the stakes and is willing to act. So what's next? Before you are several key policy solutions that we have studied and proposed. Explore and encourage local land use and zoning reforms. Consider how government regulations impact housing and implement reforms. Leverage tax incentives and taxpayer-funded support for low-income and middle-income housing. Support regional approaches to solving housing challenges. Help communities understand their housing needs and challenges. But the one I primarily want to talk to you today about is the Residential Infrastructure Fund. The Residential Housing Infrastructure Assistance Program provides low-interest loans to communities to finance infrastructure projects and that support residential housing development. As the loans are repaid and the money again becomes available for future financing, so that fund resolves. This program prioritizes jurisdictions that have taken steps to support housing and reduce regulation. Just last year alone, $51 million investment supported 2,400 new housing units across Indiana. And the beauty of this fund, the money is already being repaid and reused. This program creates a sustainable infrastructure for growth. It prioritizes land use reforms and is driven by local communities. 2, it prioritizes infrastructure and state economic development planning. If we're going to bring in new employers, we must ensure that communities around them have the housing stock to support that growth. That means aligning infrastructure, housing, and workforce planning, not treating them as separate silos. Lastly, land use reform and local zoning flexibility. We're not asking the state to override local control, but many cities and counties want help modernizing their zoning codes to allow more diverse housing types: duplexes, infill homes, even accessory dwelling units. Providing model ordinances, technical support, incentives can go a long way toward unblocking housing development. There's also a huge ROI on this. The National Association of Home Builders estimates that building 1,000 new homes in Kentucky yields $57.4 million in one-time state and local taxes, and $16.6 million in an annual reoccurring tax revenue. That's revenues for schools, for roads, and for public safety. When we invest in housing, we invest in the long-term physical health of our Commonwealth. To close, I want to reemphasize that housing is not a single issue challenge. It touches workforce development, economic growth, education, and healthcare. If we're serious about keeping our young people here, attracting investment, and growing local economies, we have to treat the housing issue as mission critical. Kentucky has the land, we have the momentum. What we need now is the continued leadership from you, the General Assembly, to help us build the policies and infrastructure to meet this moment. Thank you for your time and your commitment to building a stronger, more prosperous Kentucky. And I'm happy to answer any questions, Chair, or we can wait till the end.
Thank you, John. Are there any questions?
Question.
Yes, Senator Mills.
Thank you, John. I appreciate the presentation. Just curious, y'all have been looking at housing for the last couple of years, pretty in depth. In one word, would you consider the housing issue a challenge or is it a crisis? How would you characterize that?
I would probably say it's a crisis. I mean, you all have acted a lot of pro-growth policy here in the past couple of years. The census data shows that Kentucky has grown. We've not grown as fast as we would like, but as this chart illustrates, again, for moderate growth, we're going to have to issue 13,000 permits. That would be up about 2,000 on average of what we're doing now.
Yeah.
And that's been between 2008 and 2023. So I would say it is critical that we address this going forward.
Senator Deneen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question. You brought up the point about we need to encourage expanding zoning regulations and opening those up. As each area across the Commonwealth is quite different according to their needs, does the Chamber have some suggested overall changes that you would like to see in that would encourage and assist builders and developers that would help us achieve the goals here?
Yeah, so going back to the RIF model, Indiana, the way that program works is those funds are accessible as long as the community or city does an XYZ approach to things. So let's say there's a development project that requires a new stoplight or something. They need those last dollars. Those funds would be accessible to the city and county if they deregulate a little bit. To your point, some areas may have less laws than other, but they would include that on the application. That would just be something that they had already addressed. So maybe it's something like fewer trees in an area for the development project. Maybe we instead of 5, we make that 3. So maybe that type of regulation is something that we could support.
Representative Watkins.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I really appreciated hearing this from the Chamber's perspective. I want to zero in on the workforce challenges that I really think are a big hindrance to housing supply. I have a local government background, so for any city that has a building permit office, it's almost virtually impossible to hire the people necessary to review the plans, which in turns make approvals of projects delayed. And I've heard some private sector solution like third-party reviewers or anything of that nature. Does the Chamber have a perspective about the workforce shortages necessary, I think, on the government side that could help speed up things like permitting and zoning changes to increase supply?
I don't know if we'd have a comment on, the government shortage there. We are very much in the workforce shortage business, if you will. 9 times out of 10, if we're involved in policy discussion, there is a workforce component to it. So you all are no stranger to the numbers. We rank in the bottom 10 states annually when it comes to workforce participation rate. I believe the data that we have reflects that in order, if we're going to continue to grow and to create more jobs for people, we're going to have places for them to live and raise their families and be close to work. So I believe there could be possibly a workforce issue there, but maybe not. We may not be in a position to comment where it's so government specific in that situation.
And just a really quick follow-up, if I may. And I hear you on the construction trade side. I mean, we've been in a construction trades crisis I would call it a crisis for well over a decade now when it comes to things like journeymen and plumbers and electricians and so on and so forth. But in my perspective, it really doesn't. If you can increase the amount of folks that are general contractors that are pulling permits, that doesn't do anything if you don't have the people to review them and approve them. Mm-hmm. And so I think the government side of workforce is just as important in this case as it is the private sector. Would you agree with that logic?
I think it's definitely worth the conversation, Representative. To your point, we have on the construction side, I believe this General Assembly passed a keys flexibility a couple of years ago, to your point, to encourage folks to go more into the trade professions. I think it's definitely timely to have a conversation on the review process and the workers and the staff and what goes into those education fields to perform those duties. Definitely.
Co-Chair Mills.
Okay, John, I got one more question for you. On the Indiana RFRA idea, what is what the interest rate is, and like how quick so for instance, if somebody's borrowing X amount of dollars, how quick do they have to pay that back so it can get back into the fund and it can be reloaned out again?
On the return of those dollars, I'm gonna have to get back with you.
Okay.
It's my understanding those low interest loans are around 3%.
Okay. So it's not free money.
No, sir.
Okay.
It is a public-private partnership essentially.
And the interest rate would flow back into the fund, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, John. And also regarding the RIF, how long has Indiana been?
I think 2021 potentially. Don't hold me to that.
Okay. And do you all know if Kentucky would be expected the same kind of results, or is there any atmosphere that is different in Kentucky?
I think one of the big issues and differences that we may have is the implementation process of the program, just because, their government's set up differently, and how those funds flow through the government we'd have to address that. But we look forward to that conversation. I can tell you this, that if you go online and look at where the loans have been approved, these are happening right across the border. So in Jeffersonville, New Albany, taking advantage of that, economic hub of Louisville, that we're really missing an opportunity here.
Senator Higdon.
Thank you. You mentioned the infrastructure assistance program and low interest rates on that. IRBs are fairly popular, which counties and cities can issue those industrial revenue bonds. Wouldn't that be basically the same type thing, except that the state's not participating in that, the local government is?
I think it's similar. I think this would be more of a program led by you all and would give more flexibilities to cities and counties. This would just be another tool in the toolkit. So probably similar, but again, it just gives them another resource to promote more housing in their areas.
Thank you.
And this one would be tied specifically to residential infrastructure, so that may be a difference.
Representative McPherson.
So it sounds like to me that this fund could be, or maybe is set up, or could be more modeled after our tobacco settlement money. The kind of way we've had a very successful program for 25 years. If we model that after that and put some seed money in, and then allow a good committee to review and approve projects that would work within a system, kind of like what you're saying, a template system of regulations, a template system of paying back. We could even work on a tax structure to possibly that the state could forgive some taxes and stuff and help pay some of this infrastructure money back over time, because like we say, the rate of return, one house is going to give you a good rate of return, one family, somebody working. But we have a model that's been working for about 25 years and is growing continually, and so we could look to that model and kind of go forward.
Yep, absolutely. The beauty of this program in Indiana also, Representative, is those dollars, the larger cities cannot just keep all of them. You could place some population thresholds, if you will, that way to reserve some areas for your neck of the woods too.
Correct, and again, that's kind of the way, the board that you would have set up could look at all that modeling and decide, and even put a point scoring system on maybe who and how that would work. But we could target some money, seed money, and then let it revolve back in. And if we can have a program that it could be anywhere near successful, we've been looked at as a nation of how we used our tobacco fund money and used it wisely, and it's still going today. And if we could do anywhere near that, I think we would look like we're doing something that would serve the Commonwealth very well.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, John. Really appreciate your testimony. Right. The next group is the Kentucky Bankers Association. If you all could just come up, turn your microphone on, make sure the green light is on, and introduce yourselves, and then proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Co-Chair Wooden, Co-Chair Mills, and members of the committee. I'm John Cooper of the Kentucky Bankers Association. I have with me today Tim Shink, who's our general counsel, who will make our presentation. And we're just trying to get the technology right here, and when we do, we'll be ready to roll.
Great. Good morning, members of the committee, co-chairs. Thank you all for having us here today to talk about Kentucky's housing crisis. Appreciate the opportunity and also the work you all have put forward in helping address this crisis. I will say at the outset, some of this is information you previously saw from the Kentucky Housing Corporation and the study that they did, but our goal here is to talk about this on a little bit more granular level and a potential solution to this. I know time is of the essence, so we'll try to move fairly quickly here today. So as you're aware, you've seen this slide here before, and it's talking about Kentucky's housing gap in analysis. And it talks about it based off of area median income. And here today, we're really focused off that 80% and below. In terms of, and that covers 70% of Kentucky's housing need based off of this study. Why is that number significant? Because for the banking industry, we're committed to the Community Reinvestment Act, which has to deal with how we give back to communities and make sure that we're addressing needs from low and moderate income, but also workforce housing, which is a really critical aspect that we've heard from our bankers, constituents. So we're focusing today on that 70%. So it's which is the 80% on here and below of AMI. So that really particular sector. When we talk about Kentucky's housing supply gap, this again comes from the Kentucky Housing Corporation study, but as you can see, this is color coded, but it's with the purpose just showing that this is something throughout the Commonwealth. Obviously, this is a big issue within Jefferson and Fayette counties, but there's not a county here that does not suffer from a lack of housing supply, rental and ownership, and there's a lot of different needs that are needed across here that need to be addressed. Looking at it from a more granular level, you can see in the dark blue, we have obviously Jefferson and Fayette counties that are those that are considered most at need based off of the statistics. But there are a number of other areas out here that have significant needs. And I know we can't break the statistics up by legislative districts, but I wanted to highlight a number of URAL's districts based off of counties. And as you know, these are a number of counties with our largest amounts of developments, new business, and needs. And you can see that where these shortages lie, but obviously Jefferson, Fayette here, but you look at counties like Hardin, McCracken, Campbell County. I mean, these are real needs throughout the Commonwealth of counties that probably don't get noted as much as Jefferson and Fayette, but the housing crisis is across the Commonwealth, and it is not particular to one county. And as you know, this represents a large sector of URAL's counties and that need that we're addressed here. I really like this chart, which comes again from the Bowen National Research funded by the Kentucky Housing Corporation's need. But I think that there's no better example of the need for workforce housing than Rowan County. When you think of Rowan County, you've got the hospital there, Morehead State. You've got some really critical pieces of infrastructure for our Commonwealth to be successful. Professionals there that are working, but they're having to drive to Lexington or another surrounding county to work. And that's simply not efficient to have them drive an hour per day because simply they can't afford the housing there or it's not available. And that's a challenge, as we talked about earlier, with having the right people in place as we continue to grow in a Commonwealth. But we have to have the housing formed not only in the major metropolitan areas, but these areas. But I can think of no better example than Rowan County, where you've got a prominent university, a prominent hospital, but a lot of their employees have to commute substantial distance to get the work done. And then this was used, I know, in the last committee hearing, but we talk about what are challenges that we face within the housing market. I know this talks about it in 24 versus 25. But when you look at where this was based off of the NHAB statistics for challenges for the building industry for 2025, the two largest ones expected for 2025 are based off of interest rates. High interest rates and buyers' expectations that interest rates will decline if they wait. Which leaves the banking industry uniquely able to help and assist in this area of housing because we directly affect interest rates, and we've got some mechanisms to talk about that coming forward. Again, when we're talking about the Kentucky's housing crisis, we're talking again, just to reiterate, we're talking about the 70% need, which is those at 80% of AMI or lower. So low income housing in the workforce housing space. And we think that those are the highest needs of this Commonwealth, not only in terms of its citizens, but also in terms of addressing the largest populace. We talked about how interest rates are a challenge. And if looking at the previous study, inflation was listed as a large challenge for 2024. But 2025, the building industry indicated that they did not foresee that being as large of a challenge. Obviously, deals are being cut all the time related to tariffs and things of that nature. But again, we're uniquely able to work with interest rates here. Additional challenges not mentioned in that study is that, federal tax credits are changing. We just had the big, beautiful bill pass United States Congress. We'll wait and see where that trickle down comes out. But there's also the proposed elimination of federal funds related to HUD cuts. So those are, some real challenges that potentially affect the building industry. And that's really where we are today, which is to propose a solution. I know at the last committee, you all talked a lot about public-private partnerships, and we think we've got a really good proposal here for you all. We talked a lot about this in the short session this year. I know with the budget being closed, that was a challenge in addressing a lot of that. But again, banks can address the interest rate challenge. And what we have is a $20 million commitment from banks to go towards a revolving fund, which would essentially address a lot of this housing crisis, which again is this 70% and below, the workforce and the low-income housing tax credits. And this is, and I think in a critical portion of this, which we talked to various members, including you all, of the General Assembly in the spring, is that this is about creating new doors. It's not about refinances. It's not about flipping things out. This is creating new housing to really tackle the crisis. But again, $20 million from the commitment from banks, which will be tied in with tax credits, which I'll talk a little bit more in a second. So we have a group called Hope of the Midwest. They've been doing this for 15 years, but they have over $784 million in tax credit construction, 0% default rate. They've worked in various forms of housing, some ranging from historical, so redoing communities, to manufactured housing, to new construction. So thinking of opportunities that may traditionally not have been addressed, the importance here is the flexibility, is that where there's a need, it can grow anywhere across the Commonwealth. Again, the second bullet point really addresses building long-standing housing, right? Because we can address housing that may not last, and that may be cheap or easy to do, but this is, again, not compromising housing. We're talking about long-term construction that will be existing for years and years, which will really help address the housing crisis. And then when you talk about how the effectiveness of the program works, I mean, affordable housing is obviously the big challenge here, but by virtue of utilizing some tax credits with developers, builders, and the bankers, we can typically offer tenant rents that are 15% lower than that of traditional. So if you think of a community like Moorhead, where maybe their average tenant rate is $1,200 a month, you take that down to $800 or $900 a month, all of a sudden that can cover their utilities and a lot of their expenses related to housing and making it affordable. That 15%, it can go up to 20%. You can slide it on the scale, but you think of those communities and making things a discounted rate, that can make it much more affordable. And again, you've got long-standing compliance periods, so it ensures that the housing is sustainable and it remains to a high standard, and that also you have this continually represented across the Commonwealth, and that's the big concept we want to push. This fund is not specific to one area. It can go where there is a need. So if there's a need in Rowan County, we can go there. We can address needs in Jefferson, but we can also address them in Hardin, McCracken, any counties where the needs go. And as part of the federal guidance associated with this is that it's not just based off decisions from the bankers. It's based off decisions for the funds. And that independence is really important in having it revolving and evergreen, which we'll talk about here in a second. So again, when we talk about flexibility of the funds, I know you all talked about in committee a lot about some of the needs. So this fund would traditionally be outside of what's been done, and that it has the ultimate of flexibility. So it can go to land acquisition costs, it can go to infrastructure, it can go to building. It's whatever the need is to get the project done. And with the commitment of the bankers of the $20 million, that ensures there's not only government money to back it, but bank money to back the projects and fund them at a lower interest rate, making them affordable. The funds would be repaid by the developer and redeployed. So the theory behind this is it's an evergreen fund. So as these projects are paid off, they get reinvested in another community down the road. And that obviously has an ongoing process so that it would affect the Commonwealth for years and years. When we talk about tax credits, these are obviously something that really are important in terms of how it works, but also, understanding the budget. Fiscal notes and things like that are important. We understand that. But these tax credits, one of the critical pieces of this is that they don't kick in until the doors are created. So they vest. So projects built, doors are created, then theoretically they would vest at 20% per year over 5 years. And that's what creates flexibility, right? So you wouldn't have the benefit of the tax credit without a new door being created. And then by stretching it out over a period of time, it makes sure that that housing maintains its structural integrity and that there's appropriate housing for the individuals that are living. Again, earned over 5 years, and then making them transferable is really important. So that's the benefit that we talk about shortage of supply with developers and builders. This can help them be engaged because they need the tax credits to jump in and can put these projects in regions they may not typically go. I know Senator Carpenter talks a lot about building houses in this committee and how it's easier sometimes and I don't want to steal his numbers, but it can be easier for him to build a $500,000 house than a $250,000 house. But tax credits can play a really key component in building large pieces of housing rather than just individual units that can really, again, address that with an 80% and lower AMI. And then this is where it gets to where it benefits the banks. We, uniquely to all lenders, the banks have a federal obligation under the Community Reinvestment Act, CRA. There's all kinds of different acronyms out there. But to make sure that they invest a certain number of their deposits in their communities. And we've worked at length with the prudential regulators to ensure that they'd have their backing so that this can ensure that the banks meet their Community Reinvestment Act, but also in having flexibility not only to go from their community where there may not be as large of a need of a housing crisis, but to go to communities throughout the Commonwealth. So it really takes it out of just their limited area. We think that we've had really favorable discussions with those in the General Assembly in the spring. Obviously, we understand with the budget being closed, that changes some things, but excited for the opportunity to talk about the bank's commitment to this Commonwealth and the potential opportunities around this revolving fund.
And Representative Decker, you noticed Billy Wade, and Billy runs Hope of the Midwest. It's been a real success story for affordable housing, for the projects, and they've had 0 defaults.
Senator Mills.
Very good. Well, gentlemen, thank you for your presentation. First thing I'd like to note is that under the housing challenges, you documented that inflation is, in fact, down in 25 over 24. So I like that in the presentation.
Thank you, Coach.
But to the real facts, how does this? I guess my real question is, how does this differ from what the Kentucky Housing Corporation is doing? And is this just another avenue for tax credit housing? How would you answer that?
I know a lot of what Kentucky Housing does, and they do some great things. I think the difference is, we talked a little bit about government requirements, and I know Representative Watkins was talking a little bit about staffing and things. But what Hope's been able to do is uniquely is that a lot of these same reports, inspection reports, things that take across the process, the history speaks for itself in terms of numbers, but they're able to ensure that their structural integrity's all done, but they're not subject to committee meetings and things like that can take some time. So quite frankly, they build things quicker. The funding happens and it runs, and these have run independent of tax credits previously. These projects have been in existence throughout this Commonwealth for years and intrastate, but it's really just the efficiencies and really getting down to being able to do all the things that are required in the building process, right? Inspections, everything in between, with a team that does that day in, day out. So you may not be waiting a month for a meeting. You may not be waiting a month for approval. You get in the inspection report, it's a check. You're moving on to the next one the next day, which shortens the life cycle of constructing new homes or new housing.
So is Hope for the Midwest, are they more focused on single family and duplex type as opposed to larger apartment buildings? What's their focus? Is it all across the board, all the above?
Traditionally, it's been larger multifamily pieces, but as I wanted to try to iterate in the presentation is that it can go across the board. So while they've done that, they're working on one with manufactured housing, a development with manufactured housing, which is lower cost and creates more doors. So it's really dependent on the need. Historically, it's been larger projects with multifamily, but they do have a history also of 1 to 4 family pieces.
And then my last question is, so will this be limited as far as how much one entity could, or one area could take, say geographically limited? How can we make sure that it'll be spread across the state?
I think the goal is to spread it across the state, and that's, with 153 member banks located throughout this Commonwealth, they want their communities impacted. We have banks in every county, and they want to see it come to their area as well. So, wherever the need is and where we're run, and that's why we wanted to make it an evergreen fund for purposes of, well, you might not get it on the first run, but maybe we do it on the second run, and if this is successful, then we continue to spread it throughout the state. 200,000, 250,000 doors are a lot of doors. And we want to tackle it throughout the Commonwealth and not specific to 2 counties. We want to address it across all the counties.
So is this sorry, one more question. So is the $20 million commitment, is that an annual commitment over a certain time, or is that a one-time commitment?
That would be theoretically spread over the first round of funding. So that would be, you'd think of it as first layer of funding. So determining the first projects, setting that aside as up to that $20 million mark. It could go up more, but determining those projects, running them, showing its success, building off of historical success, and growing the program as an alternative.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair.
Representative Watkins.
Thank you. I appreciate this presentation. I think it's intriguing. Anytime we have public-private partnerships where there are public funds used, I think it's responsible to talk about parameters. And so I actually think the bulk of what I really want to talk about could probably best be handled offline in the conversation. So I'm asking for that up front. But the one I will, Madam Chair, is you talked about state average income, but I know state average income and area median income to be vastly different, particularly where state average income can be skewed by, a very wealthy person or so. Not saying that would be me by any chance, but I'm concerned about eligibility requirements when we're talking about the poorest of the poorest Kentuckians. So I live in Jefferson County, I live in Louisville, but my family lives in Christian County, in Hoptown. And so I think the affordability element of it, as all of the studies have shown, the Kentuckians who are having the greatest housing burdens are probably not going to be met by this model. Is that a fair assertion to make?
Well, I think, thank you for the question, Representative. I think, when you look at area medium income, as you noted, it's as high as 40,000 or low as 20,000 in some areas, as high as 80,000 in some areas. But when you look at some of the more rural areas, some of those costs are significantly lower, land acquisition costs, things like that. So we have success. We've proven this model's success privately throughout areas of the state. So we've not just been constructing in Louisville and Fayette County. They've been in rural areas, and even out of state. We've done it in rural areas. We have one right now going on out of state that's in a rural area. So I think that's a critical component where you make a very valid point as to where the incomes are, but making it work based off of cost, and then also the flexibility in the type of housing. So, some things can cost more in terms of rebuilding if you're talking about historical tax credits and things like that. But if you're putting up modular housing, which has made substantial gains in the last decade as to the quality of it, that can be more affordable. So I think it really depends on flexibility. And then when you look at Louisville, there's clearly a housing crisis there. Median income is higher, but there are areas of Louisville that it's easier to travel in and you don't want to have that distance. But again, it's that flexibility that builds it in to address that median income piece. And I hope that makes sense, but we've been able to make it work regardless of where the median income is across the Commonwealth with various projects. And I'd love to be able to show those to you.
I'd love to see that. And just a really quick follow-up. It seems like it's kind of first come, first served, not targeted, right? Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, I think where the banker's commitment is really for proposals for what communities where the need is. I mean, admittedly, I identified Rowan County as just what I thought was a really good example there, but it's those communities that have the workers, I think, and have the residents there, and nobody's fulfilling the need. So I could tell you today, I haven't heard of any counties delineated that theoretically, if this were to pass, that are targeted for it, but it's to run to the need and hopefully expand throughout as we tackle this crisis across the Commonwealth.
Yeah, thank you.
And Representative Watkins, your point about the bottlenecks I think this helps to address some of the bottleneck issue. That doesn't totally make it go away, but everybody's trying to get product to market and get it in efficient as quickly as they possibly can. But we're very cognizant of what you stated there.
Representative Decker.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all, everybody who's presented today. Very helpful. I do have a comment, or a quick question. Is it Hope of the Midwest? Is that what it's called? I think I was really interested in Representative Watkins' point about construction being a holdup and that we don't have enough tradesmen. And I guess I might be asking Mr. Wade if the construction is a problem in what he has been able to do. The lack of tradesmen.
Yes, it certainly is.
Okay.
Certainly is.
Well,
Almost all areas of the state, too. No particular section that's not impacted by that.
I'm going to file a bill this year that I had thought of as more of a criminal justice reform and to work with recidivism, in that I'm working with President Ryan Quarles from KCTCS to set up one facility in the state where inmates who are recommended by their wardens could go for perhaps 2 years to learn a trade, to come out of prison with an education, at least a GED, plus a trade in various certifications. So, and now I think it could help with affordable housing as well, from what I'm hearing today. Would you agree?
Yes.
You mentioned the manufactured housing that we're involved with right now.
If you would like to come up to the microphone so that we can have you on record, on your comments on record. Thank you. And introduce yourself for the record as well.
Billy Wade with Hope of the Midwest and the KBA. The manufactured housing that we mentioned earlier we're involved with right now, the manufacturer is out of Indianapolis. Over 50% of their workforce are felons that have been released, and they're learning a trade in a manufactured housing facility. So your point, Ms. Decker, I think is very, very good and can work.
Thank you. And we have learned, if I could make one comment, we have learned that Michigan has done this very thing that we're talking about, and that their recidivism is cut in half. And I assume that their trades are also booming. So we thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Higdon.
John, you mentioned Billy Wade very highly a while ago. If you knew he was from Lebanon, I don't know if his stock would go down.
You didn't have to tell that about me.
Should I
He's one that there's not a whole lot of alumni from Lebanon High School here in Frankfurt, so it's good to see Billy.
Thank you.
The refundable tax credits. I understand refundable tax credits, but how does it work in? Who's funding that? Because there is a cost associated, and how do they? What portion of the money would be for the? I don't fully understand. Are we talking about 100 million, 50 million, 20 million? What are we talking about?
I'll address that, Senator Higdon. The reason we're asking it to be refundable is that sometimes there's a lack of buyers for buying the credits, as we found with the federal program. So having it refunded as opposed to being sold, I think just gives it more flexibility. But it would be very similar to the federal credit in that, it's calculated based on eligible costs. So whether it's refundable or sold, either event, it's going to wind up being a reduction of the investor's income tax. So the impact on the state will be the same whether it's refundable or sold.
I guess it was something that had to be included in our budget because there is an expense involved, right?
There would be. Of course, again, we're talking not earning the credit until the project is constructed and put in service. So, theoretically 3 years down the road.
Okay.
Yes, it would have to be accounted for in the budget items. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Really appreciate
Co-
it.
Co-Chair, if I could just
Yes.
add one follow-up to
Of course.
Representative Watkins' question. Just to clarify on the issue of area delineation, when we were working with the prudential regulators, and particularly the FDIC related to Community Reinvestment Act, they were very clear that the banks were not allowed to pick which area to go into. That's part of receiving Community Reinvestment Act credit. So that's a great feature of the fund is that they put their money in, and it's not blind because we're putting in projects that are noteworthy and are going to make an impact in communities, but banks don't have a say. It would go into the fund and then be chosen off of that, but can't say we're going to Jefferson, we're going to Fayette with bank determination. It would be determined by the fund.
And Representative Watkins, if I could follow up, make sure you're not misunderstanding that your income distorts. We're talking about area median income, not average income. Okay.
Oh, that was my point, because I think the presentation said state average and area median income, in my understanding, are different. But
Yeah, we're talking about median.
area median,
Yeah, it's area median, so based off census tract off that day.
there we go.
Yes.
Thank you, Co-Chair.
Thank you very much. Our next presenter is from Mercatus Center. Sorry. You could just introduce yourself. And make sure the green light is on.
Mike's not.
Make sure your green light is on.
Oh, now it's even brighter now. Chair Whitten, Chair Mills, members of the Housing Task Force, thank you for allowing me to offer informational testimony on this important topic. I'm Charlie Gardner. I'm a research fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. The Mercatus Center is dedicated to advancing knowledge relevant to current policy debates, and towards this end, its scholars conduct independent, nonpartisan analysis of legislation, rules, and proposals. As a research fellow, I study tools available to state policymakers to promote housing construction faster at lower prices and with less regulatory uncertainty. Today, I will provide testimony on opportunities to cut red tape that stands in the way of more and lower housing costs in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. What I want to do today, briefly, is twofold. Number one is to provide an overview of what other states have been doing on housing, particularly just over the last year, where there's been a lot of activity in state houses over more than 24 states. And secondly, look at how these ideas might apply to Kentucky. Another point I'm going to emphasize is that these reforms are predominantly ones that should cost little or nothing to the state. They're essentially rights-based reforms and ways to streamline existing processes that shouldn't have a substantial fiscal impact. At least in those states that have adopted them, the fiscal analysis generally have shown that these have minimal fiscal impact on state budgets. So what's happened in recent years? Particularly, we focus just on this past legislative session. It was an extremely busy session nationwide. There were over 600 housing bills introduced across more than 24 states. And of these, just to date, 122 have been enacted. Let me get back to that screen. So what are some of the reforms that have just happened over this past year? Minimum lot size reform has been tackled for the first time in Texas and Maine, notably. Utah has also been active there. ADU reform. 2 new states this year that have adopted statewide ADU reforms are Arkansas and Iowa, both very strong laws. Permitting reform law. Laws have been very popular in many different states across the country. Residential and commercial zones. Florida has probably the strongest law. It's Live Local Act. But many other states have adopted this. Post-COVID, there have been a lot of commercial vacancies. This has been a way to increase housing stock in areas with existing infrastructure. And finally, courts and appeals, streamlining legal processes around housing. They can often stand in the way. Let's say even if you do get housing approved, sometimes municipalities, developers may face lawsuits that can tie them up for years, which can even sink the project. So states have been looking at ways to essentially decrease uncertainty by streamlining legal procedures as well. So in about a month, I expect Mercatus is going to be releasing its newest menu of options. I'm just giving you a preview here of what we expect to be in it in terms of recommended reforms for states. I won't go over all of these, but just to give you a sense of where things stand right now. Some of these ideas were on the previous slide. Other of these are ideas that we've been recommending as being particularly effective, practical, pragmatic, relatively low cost or no cost reforms that can help either streamline permitting, remove local red tape that stands in the way of housing construction, reduce litigation risk, or otherwise speed up the production of housing. Some of these, I think, have been mentioned already before today. We have third-party review, that is allowing private review of for housing inspections. In addition, promoting transit-oriented development, limiting the ability of localities in some cases to abuse fees and impact fees for homes, and even just anything as simple as legalizing existing conditions. A lot of zoning out there doesn't even allow what's currently built in some of our older cities, and currently that's legal. There were some very good numbers in the previous presentations about how far behind Kentucky is on producing housing. I just wanted to give you a brief look at how things compare to surrounding states. So Kentucky produces, this is as of just 2024 numbers, produces more than Illinois, which is, I believe, almost in last place or dead last among all 50 states. Ohio, Mississippi, and West Virginia is on par with Missouri, but builds less than Tennessee, Indiana, Arkansas, Alabama, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Notably, Tennessee produces in 2024, produced almost 3 times the rate of housing relative to its existing housing stock. Indiana also significantly more. But what about housing cost as well? A big question I think that's been debated recently is what's happened to the starter home? Why can't the market produce a home for the entry-level buyer for younger families? I saw a statistic recently saying that the median new home buyer is 38 years old. That's the first-time home buyer, whereas typically that's something that would have been 10 times earlier. So this question is, why isn't the market producing these homes? Why isn't the market producing, I'm specifically talking about single-family detached homes, providing and creating home ownership opportunities, both for younger home buyers, newer home buyers, lower-income home buyers, or even elderly retired people who would like a place to retire or just simply downsize when the home no longer suits their needs. So what I did here is I broke down, this is just relevant to one of the reforms we recommend, homes by lot size. This is something we found that in most states there's a strong correlation between the amount of land for a home and the cost of a home. And although Kentucky generally new builds can be provided within a median of $350,000 to $400,000, only with much smaller lots, that is under 4,000 square feet, do you see homes, new homes with a median below $300,000. And that's just the median. So that there are homes as low as around $200,000 or less, which is getting pretty close to being affordable, going by standard calculations and income burdens, to somebody with the median Kentucky household income, which would be around $160,000, $170,000. When land is allowed to be split up into very small pieces, it's actually possible to make those homes pencil without subsidy. One issue is when I did a look at the current market conditions, the number of new homes available that were under lots of 4,000 square feet were only 2.3% of new listings. Now, I don't believe that that's a result of market choice. I think that is, if not exclusively, at least predominantly a result of regulations that prohibit it. This is something, as I mentioned, we found in other states as well. This is a consistent trend, and this is a major local obstacle, not just lot sizes, but also frontage requirements. A big part of the cost of building subdivisions, as has been talked about before, is the infrastructure cost, the linear feet of sewer, water, stormwater drainage, paving roads, electrical utilities, and all of that, if you require homes to have 50 or 60-foot frontages, drives up the cost. So I'll just close with 8 key recommendations. These are drawn from the larger list we had before, but ones which I thought were particularly relevant to the Commonwealth situation. 4 of these appeared in legislation that was introduced in Kentucky in the 2025 session, but was not ultimately passed. But these are ideas that many other states have enacted. For example, ADU legislation, that is now up to 18 different states that have those laws. And I would suggest in particular looking at Arkansas's law that was passed this year, just a couple months ago, as well as Iowa's law. They're both very strong ADU laws that attracted widespread support. 2 of these ideas are actually borrowed from Tennessee. Under new issues, vested rights is a way of increasing property rights by ensuring that cities can't downzone properties after an application has been made for a development, basically vetoing the project. It's something that Tennessee passed in just a couple months ago. And it's been, I think it will be helpful in terms of decreasing uncertainty for developers there. Also, starter home reforms, that encompasses the minimum lot size I was talking about before, residential and commercial zones, missing middle, litigation reform, and finally, what I'm referring to here is Tennessee-style HOAs. As I understand it, Kentucky recently adopted essentially an HOA, a statewide HOA law. In Tennessee, their similar law is very simplified and streamlined and has allowed the formation of very small-scale HOAs, as few as 2 units. This has been a huge part of Nashville's infill construction boom over the last few years. If you've had a chance to visit there and drive around some of the the urban neighborhoods of Nashville. They've really been transformed through reinvestment in new housing construction. That has been enabled by this, I believe, by this HOA law. So a similar reforms in Kentucky, potentially to exempt smaller HOAs from some of the most onerous restrictions, might unlock some of those opportunities for, particularly for Kentucky's larger cities. And thank you. I know there was a lot, but I appreciate your attention to all this, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you, Charles. It's great testimony. Co-Chair Mills has a question.
Charles, the first thing I'd ask is that if you could, your suggestions that you just gave at the end of the presentation, if you could elaborate on those and send those to our staff, and we could get them out to all the members, I think that would be helpful to have a paragraph on each one of these to just kind of give some further information on those. But one thing that caught my eye when you were talking about the legalization of existing conditions. So can you explain that again real quick? Is that just as simple as saying, if it's in the neighborhood, you can build up to that point or with those same setbacks that are there?
Yes, there are a few ways to conceptually to approach it or to implement it, but the essential idea would be your immediate urban context or town context, whatever is within a block or two of you, should be what you're allowed to build to as well, and zoning shouldn't make that illegal. So sort of set a baseline for what's existing in the neighborhood and set that as the minimum. There are different ways to do it. You could average the density on a block. You could take the densest structure on a block. So there are a few ways I've seen it done. But to get around this idea where, for example, if your home, were to burn down in a fire, were destroyed in a natural disaster, you wouldn't legally be able to rebuild that structure, which it would often be the case, is probably the case in many neighborhoods today. So that would be the idea. But there are a few different ways to do it. Just as to your other question, Senator Mills, I do have a memo where I've elaborated some of these points, which I'm glad to send to you. It just sort of it gives you a little more detail with some citations and links if you want to look at the text of some of these other state bills that have passed this session.
And then one final question: the vested rights. Can you explain that just a little bit more? I mean, you did say, does that have to do with as far as legal challenges on the use of lots by, say, outside groups or something like that?
What the vested rights are is essentially establishing a time at which a property owner's entitlement to use the rights that he has become immune from revocation by the locality. So if a builder were to acquire a property that's zoned for multifamily, submits an application to build a multifamily parcel, and somebody complains, runs to the city council and says, I just got wind of these plans, we need to rezone this, can come in after the application is made and essentially downzone it and block the project. So there's no assurance at any point in the process that what you bought is actually what you're going to have. Tennessee initially stated that once, this was, I believe, back in 2014, initially stated that rights would vest at the time an application was approved. This year they changed it to the time a completed application is submitted, provided it complies with the local regulations. So that's the idea. Currently, as far as I can tell, the state of law on that in the Commonwealth is a bit uncertain. It hasn't recently been addressed by the courts, but there's the opportunity for legislative clarification to decrease uncertainty in the zoning process.
Thank you. I appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
Representative McPherson.
Yes, so since we're on the rights of property and property owners, are we seeing any appetite for maybe larger developments that have large upscale homes in them? And you've got HOAs that prohibit auxiliary buildings, to backing into those to say we could go back and revisit that and maybe get our young children out of our basement and into at least an auxiliary home, or maybe get a mom and dad out of our basement into an auxiliary home or a mother-in-law's quarters or something that was before prohibited, but now we see a need, and we can, tiny homes are becoming a lot more popular, cost efficient, all of those things. Are we seeing any appetite for going back in and rezoning and redoing some of these larger subdivisions?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'll tell you, most of these laws that I reference, particularly ones that are enacted, contain explicit carve-outs for any sort of private covenant, including HOAs. So it doesn't override the private covenant. I think that, just politically speaking, that would tend to be a bit more controversial. I'm not saying it couldn't be done, and there may be one or two examples where it has happened. Another idea I've heard proposed is putting some sort of time limitation on HOAs where they need to be renewed so they're not perpetual, and the residents have some expectation that things might change. But as far as overriding them, I believe it could be done. I just haven't seen very many bills where legislators have taken that step.
Representative Decker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple of questions. On your slide about possible solutions, I saw single stair. Can you say what that was?
Sure. In most states, and in the vast majority of U.S. cities until very recently, to build a multifamily building, building codes and fire codes would require two means of egress. So you'd have to have two stairs, no matter how big the apartment building was. Even if it was a very thin apartment building, very narrow building, you would need to accommodate two stairs. Seattle and New York were the two cities that were exceptions that have always built single stair, have allowed single stair. So the idea has gotten around, mainly promoted by builders, infill builders, stating that this requirement was adding a lot of cost without any benefit to downtown apartment buildings, small-scale apartment buildings on small lots, like 3 or 4 story apartment buildings. So many different towns and now states have been revisiting this idea that maybe we should explore allowing single stairs with certain conditions, as long as you have very short hallways, which is the case in many of these buildings. You sort of open the door and you're right there into the stairwell, and that would have significant cost savings. So there are a number of states that have done that recently. Connecticut is studying it, I believe. North Carolina proposed to build. There's a few other ones that I could supply to you.
So thank you. And I recently went to a seminar by a think tank. I can't remember the name, but it was fascinating about how single-family dwelling or multiple dwelling has a direct impact on family size. I don't know if you've ever looked into that, but they had extensive data showing, many countries are now below their birth rate to sustain their culture. And so this think tank was promoting the thought of it doesn't really matter the size of the single family dwelling. It can be very small. The land size can be very small, but that there tends to be a 2-point-something birth rate if you live in a single family dwelling and a 1 if you live in an apartment, so that if you want to sustain your culture and keep your birth rate up, you have single family dwellings. But at that same time, I was doing some research. I saw various states have had a ban on single family dwelling zoning. I didn't see that in your list. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Oh, a ban on
zoning for single family dwellings, maintaining, I think, that you could do it by HOA or deed restriction, but to ban the concept of single family dwelling zoning. Thank you.
Yes, some states have not so much banned single family zoning, but have legalized building more than one unit on a lot. I don't believe there's any state which has prohibited building one unit on a property. I don't think that would be feasible. But yes, a few states have introduced the idea of expanding property owners' rights to add a second unit onto the same lot, whether as an ADU, as a duplex. To me, I just editorializing a little bit, as you said, a detached home of one's own that they can own even if that's not necessarily what somebody wants. I think it's important to have that as an option. We shouldn't set up obstacles for people to enjoying that, right? That's an important part of what most people would consider the American dream. So focusing on ways that we can increase ownership, regardless of whether we're calling it single-family zoning, whether we're calling it 2 units that are an HOA, whether we're calling it a condominium, those are all different ways to get to the goal of owning a little piece of land and a house you can call your own. Many of these ideas are directed towards that, actually enhancing that objective rather than opposing it, particularly the HOA idea. So I think that's a primary goal in view, actually, with a lot of these reforms. You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Charles, for all the great information.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And our final group today is Rebecca Hartsaw and Cappy Farrington. They're going to be talking about the historic rehabilitation tax credit and some, my opinion, great ideas for change for this. So if you all could just introduce yourselves, make sure your green light is on.
Thank you so much, Co-Chairs Witten and Mills and the Housing Task Committee for having us today. I am Cappy Farrington. I'm the co-founder of Antecedent Development, and we are a small, for-profit, mission-driven housing development company. We focus on workforce housing and adaptive reuse, and we're based in Shelbyville. So, hi, Representative Decker. It's good to see you.
Rebecca Hartsoe, Babbage co-founder with Antecedent Development. Before Cappy starts, just want to tell you a few facts about herself because she's entirely too humble to say anything. She is a mother of 3 children under 4, so kudos to her. You've got a new collection of constituents, Representative Decker. All credit to her. Additionally, she first confronted the housing crisis and workforce housing shortages while working at the Rockefeller Foundation in New York City. From there, she went to study the intersection of real estate and economic development at Harvard, getting her master's in public administration. Since then, she's come back to Kentucky, and she has been working in commercial real estate development and workforce housing initiatives here in the state and across the country. So really thrilled to have her here to talk about something that she's utilized here in the state and ways that we can take what's already a fantastic program and make it even better.
That's right. So I'd like to talk to you all about the historic tax credit program, and in particular, the one that's here in Kentucky, and how it's already working to expand and preserve housing supply, particularly workforce housing. So that's housing that's at that 70 to 80% AMI level, and how with just a few minor tweaks, I think it can be made even more effective. But before I dive in, I want to give you a little bit of context about why I care about this. I grew up in rural Mississippi and Arkansas, and I have, as Rebecca mentioned, 3 small children, and I worry now that their opportunities for economic mobility are not going to be the same as my own. And I think housing is one of those root causes that is really driving a lot of the uncertainty that many of us feel about the future of our children. And so I got into this work with my company to try to address that issue while also working with our historic buildings in our beautiful state to preserve our culture and our heritage at the same time. I will caveat this to say I'm not a tax or legal expert. I am a housing developer, and some of the tweaks I'm going to take you through are a little bit technical, so I ask that you bear with me and we work together through it, and we can invite other folks who understand the intricacies more if you have further questions. So historic tax credits are already helping to address some of the key dimensions of the housing crisis that you all have heard a lot about today and in last month's session. In particular, they create net new housing to address the housing shortage. They are working to renovate our aging housing stock, and they help to offset the rising costs of everything from financing to land that we just heard about to the rising costs of labor and building supplies. They are particularly effective at that 70 to 80% area median income level where there are not many other subsidies. Low-income housing tax credits and many of KHC's programs and other HUD programs focus on the lower end of the income spectrum, and then the free market takes care of itself at the upper end. Historic tax credits are a program that works really nicely in the middle and helps to fill a gap that not many other subsidies do. And Kentucky's existing housing stock is rapidly aging. Nearly half of our current buildings in the state are over 45 years old, which leads to a really acute need for upgrades and modernization. Costs help prevent those upgrades and modernization from being feasible for most folks. So now we have fewer new housing projects that are happening because fewer projects pencil, and fewer homeowners can afford to upgrade their aging homes. And the housing tax credit comes in to try to solve these two problems really nicely. Go to the next one. In particular, you can take an existing house like a 1970s ranch home and use a historic tax credit to help offset the costs of upgrading your HVAC system, your roof, your doors, your windows, your plumbing. You can also, and that sort of upgrades the existing housing stock. And you can also use the tax credits to create net new housing, new doors, through adaptive reuse projects. And this is really what my company focuses on. The image in the middle is a project that I'm working on right now, where we're taking a historic paint manufacturing warehouse that's vacant with plywood over the windows, and we're converting it into 138 apartments that are affordable to people who make about $20 an hour. And the historic tax credits slide nicely into a project's capital stack in a way that really helps offset some of those rising costs, in particular the costs of financing. Historic tax credits and the adaptive reuse are applied all over our Commonwealth in a whole bunch of different ways. You can take a church and turn it into apartments. You can take a Main Street building and put apartments on the top. You can take an office building and convert it into apartments. There are rural schools in counties near where I live that are being converted into senior living. You can even take a 1950s motel and convert it into housing. And these are all projects that are happening across the state. Since the beginning of the state historic tax credit program, there have been 565 projects across the Commonwealth. There's been a huge uptick in projects in an exciting way in the last 3 years because there was a new bill that increased the cap from 5 million to 100 million of eligible tax credits. Thank you all very much for passing that. And as a result, we've seen 3,910 housing units created over the last 5 years. I got that number from SHPO, from the Heritage Council this morning. It's really exciting. So what exactly is a historic tax credit? It's similar to some of the tax credits you heard mentioned today. It is a tax credit against what are called qualified rehabilitation expenses. This is anything that is already attached to an existing building, like a roof, like a HVAC system, like plumbing. And it is for buildings that are 50 years or older. When I first got into historic tax credits, I thought historic buildings meant some of the beautiful manor homes in our historic farms and beautiful log cabins in our mountains. And these are actually, like I said, your motel that's on the side of the road that looks really dilapidated. As long as it was built before 1975, it's eligible. Because so many of Kentucky's homes are already aging, by the next 5 years, we'll have 70% of the buildings in Kentucky eligible for historic tax credits. We already are already fourth in the nation for having buildings registered with the National Register for Historic Places. So there are already 43,000 buildings eligible for these tax credits. There are two parts of the program. One's administered at the federal level. This is a 20% income tax program, and this is for commercial buildings only, so it's not for homeowners. Next one. The state historic tax credit program that was expanded in 2022 and implemented in 2023 has two main parts. One is for homeowners, which is fantastic. It's a 30% refundable credit. And the other is for the kind of work that I do, which is commercial income producing housing. So these are apartments, mixed use buildings, duplexes, those types of things. This bucket is also available for hotels, for distilleries, for hospitality, etc. And this program sits under the Cabinet of Tourism. It is a 20% refundable credit. That is really important. As we heard earlier, there are very few developers who have the kind of income tax liability that would allow an income credit to be meaningful. So the fact that you can get a check from the state if you're not able to realize that credit in a given year makes these credits really valuable and helps bring in investment in the state. There's a $100 million annual cap, which sounds like a lot, but it is almost always oversubscribed. It's put into two buckets. There's the 25% that are allocated to homeowners, and there's 75% allocated to commercial projects, and those two buckets are currently not fungible. So if the commercial projects bucket has more demand than it has supply, then folks just get a smaller amount of credits. And if the homeowner projects have fewer demand than there is supply, then that money just sits in a bank account. I won't go into this. SHPO, unfortunately, was not able to join us. Our friends over at the Kentucky Heritage Council have been great partners to me in helping me access these credits, and to us as we've been thinking about how to make them even better. They have some really good resources online for how the process works. I'll point out two things. One, you do have to register on the National Register of Historic Places, which can be a barrier, especially to homeowners. And two, there is a 5-year compliance period. So you have to be able to hold the property for 5 years after you receive the tax credit, or else you risk recapture. Kentucky, thanks to the legislation you passed a few years ago, has one of the best programs in the country. It's got a very large annual cap at $100 million. It's predictable, which to a business owner like me means money. When you know what you can expect, you lower your risk. Is equal access. Our neighbors in Ohio have a scoring system which infuses a lot of politics into the selection process and creates a waiting list. And here it's just everyone has an equal bite at the apple, and that is something that developers really value. And it's also transferable and refundable, as we've talked about. These are where I think there's a few tweaks that we can make to make the project even more effective, the program even more effective. All right, so the first is the allocation process. I mentioned this earlier, but we have every year $75 million available to commercial housing and just commercial projects in general, and $25 million available to homeowner projects. Last year, there was only $4 million worth of homeowner projects, and there were $115 million worth of commercial projects. And so there was a mismatch between what the credits that were available and the credits that a project could access. And the money can't move currently between pots. So according to Craig Potts from the Heritage Council this morning, there's over $60 million just sitting in a bank somewhere that's on the sidelines, and that seems like a really easy fix that we can make. This shows you how that works. So on the left-hand side, there was only $4 million of demand with $25 million available, and on the right-hand side, you see that there was a much higher demand for the commercial credits than we had available. And that means that each developer gets a haircut of 17.5% of eligible credits. The problem with that is that it inserts uncertainty into the project. So if I want to go to the bank and I want to get a loan against the financing of my project, I need to be able to say, I'm going to get a 20% of historic tax credits that I'm eligible for. But instead, because of the process, I have to wait till June to hear how many people wanted those $75 million of tax credits and what's my portion going to be. The other challenge, and this is where we're going to get a little wonky, so let's all just ride this together. I know it's late in the afternoon. So the credit is transferable, which means that if I can't use it, I can then sell it to an investor who can, and they can give me cash, or I could partner with a bank who can use it as well. It's currently designed to only be transferred to financial institutions. But as our friends at Kentucky's Banker Association mentioned earlier, the demand for those credits is really plummeting. And so I would like to be able to ask Brown-Forman or Toyota or Blue Oval or any number of the other amazing corporations who have a Kentucky tax liability if they would be interested in purchasing my credits. And right now, the legislation doesn't allow for that. The second is that if I didn't want to sell it, if I wanted to take the refund and Kentucky cuts me a check, I have now a federal tax liability on that refund. So the federal government sees that as income to my business, and I have to pay taxes on that. And depending on how good my tax accountant is at depreciation and getting me good corporate tax rates, that could be anywhere between 20 to 35% of the credit. And then there's also this concept of carry forward, which means that if you can't use all of the credit in 1 year, you can carry it forward for a number of years. That used to be present in the tax credit legislation. When the reforms happened in 2022, it went away. And I don't know if that was intentional, but it does make it a lot harder to monetize those credits when you're not clear if you can carry it forward. So here's an illustration, sources and uses. This is from my economics class 101. You have on the left-hand side how you're going to spend the money on your project. On the right-hand side, you usually finance it with debt and equity. Both of those have gotten much more expensive in the last 5 years, contributing to the housing crisis. Tax credits come in and they both reduce the amount of debt that you need and the amount of equity that you need. And it's like a cash infusion into your project, and makes most of these projects that are applying for tax credits wouldn't happen without them. This is the difference maker. This shows you, and these slides will be available later if you want to read. I'm not going to make you go through my little receipt here with me, but this shows you how you can monetize your tax credit. The state one you take as a refund, you get your full $2 million. Your federal one, you can then sell to an investor at 85 cents on the dollar, and together that would net you $3,600,000 extra dollars in your sources that you wouldn't have otherwise. And so again, this is sort of the but for these historic tax credits, most of these projects wouldn't happen, and most of those 3,000 housing units wouldn't have been created. This is showing how much Kentucky as a state is losing on every dollar it invests in the historic tax credit program. So Kentucky is investing in a tax credit. Let's say it's a $2 million tax credit. Because the federal government is taking its federal income tax liability, the state doesn't see the full value of that tax credit, because that then goes up to the federal government. This, I'm told, is a really easy tweak in how the rules are written, and I've been given language by my lawyers, but this is how it stands currently, and this is something that would cost nothing to the state, but would make a huge difference in making every dollar you invest go all the way. All right, we can go ahead and move this forward. Yep. Next one. Okay, so I have a few ideas for you, and this is sort of the summary slide of the changes that I would propose. I've already talked to you about making the pots of money for homeowners and for commercial projects fundable. I would suggest, and we talked about this with Craig Potts and Katie Wilburn at the Heritage Foundation this morning, just remove the pots. You can say homeowners are first in line, so they get their credits first, and then commercial projects come behind, and that way you don't have to be putting these two pots and moving money around. It's just much more streamlined way to administer the program. The second down here is the federal tax fix that I mentioned. I think it's simply permitting a different kind of partnership distribution of tax credit and loss within the partnership. I've talked about expanding credit transferability, which means allowing the credits to be transferred to organizations beyond just financial institutions, so to the other corporations who have corporate income tax liability in Kentucky. I've talked about this need to make allocation more predictable. It is very hard as a small developer who's trying to develop projects like the one I talked about with 140 units to have to wait once a year to hear how much credit I am going to be allocated. I have to be able to hold the land for up to a year, which is very expensive. I have to be able to hold all my financial partners together when in a changing environment is really challenging to do. And I have to be able to take a lot of risk myself in continuing to move the project forward. If we were able to move to a system where allocation did not happen, either because it happened more frequently throughout the year, there were 2 times where the pot was allocated, or because you removed the $100 million cap, and so whoever was eligible received the credits, and you moved the cap instead to projects and limited how much an individual project could get, all of that would make it much more predictable to utilize the tax credit and easier for me to get financing off of it. And then finally, I think there are some ways where you could make the tax credit program specifically designed to prioritize housing. And other states are doing this. I have a list I'd be happy to share with you, including West Virginia, who just passed legislation on this, Maine, Texas, Georgia, Michigan. They have kickers for historic tax credit projects that have a housing component. You can have it be a kicker for doing housing, period. You could have it be an even greater tax credit if that housing is targeted towards 70%, 80% AMI and below. And that would make a value statement to say, this is a pot of money that we have already set aside, but this is the crisis that our state is facing right now. And so we want to prioritize the projects that are trying to address that crisis. It is important to say that historic tax credits do great work in tourism. They do great work in heritage. And so we would not want to try to diminish the tax credits that are available for those projects. But this could go a long way at making housing, taking abandoned schools in our rural areas, taking commercial properties on main streets in small towns like Shelbyville and putting housing into those buildings. A few things I'll add, if you will permit me to share a few notes of caution. Historic tax credits are important, but they're not enough. And I think everything you heard earlier today are fantastic ideas. Revolving loan funds for workforce housing, we would absolutely utilize that. Workforce housing tax credits, those would pair really nicely with this historic tax credit program. Land and code reform, please do away with the double stare requirement. It does make a big difference in having projects pencil. There's also, as I mentioned, a lot of unintended consequences that can happen when you meddle with a complex program like the historic tax credits. So please don't just take my word for it. Talk to the tax and legal experts who know how to write the legislation correctly. And then this credit program is only as good as the team that administers it. And I have had really good experiences with the Heritage Council, but as demand is continuing to increase over the last 2 years, their ability to meet that demand gets strained. And so consider thinking about how you make the Heritage Council office have the right resources it needs to be able to serve the taxpayers who are coming for their credits. You want to go to the last? And I'll leave you with this. Historic tax credits are already an incredible tool in Kentucky's toolbox for expanding housing. And I think with a few small tweaks, we can make it an even better tool to increase the housing supply.
Thank you so much, Cappy and Rebecca. As you know, I mean, I've talked to you all about this for over a year, and I think that these are fantastic ideas. Want to reiterate what you said. This is by no means, these changes are not to penalize the commercial, the tourism industry at all. This is just understanding that we do have a challenge with housing and to give the carrots where there need to be. So I appreciate that. Mm-hmm. Are there any questions? Oh, yes. Senator Representative Decker.
I didn't ask any questions at the last meeting, but I've made up for it today. I'm sorry. I happen to be an applicant for a nonprofit. Nonprofits can apply for these credits, yes. Just as you said, if you can't use it, you can sell it. We're selling ours.
That's right, yeah.
We've bought a building on Main Street in Shelbyville. It's going to cost something like $2.5 million for a nonprofit. But part of the reason we can do it is the historic tax. There are a couple of questions, though. I talked to Craig Potts on Thursday morning about this, and he told me all of these things you have said. One thing that he didn't mention, and I am a former tax lawyer for 20 years,
Thank
so I
goodness.
love to talk
Someone
about
here is.
tax.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I would like to talk about and have your opinion on is, well, I think I've already gotten it, but for a little bit of a different reason. You said you thought we needed to go beyond the financial institution as a partner.
Yes.
One of the things we have found to be a blockage there is that they have to be a sub-S corporation. Many banks have become they have to be a subchapter C. Many
right,
banks
yeah,
have become subchapter S's. We happen to find one that has gone back for some reason, but that seems like something we need to talk about, is why it has to be a sub C
Yes.
to be able to buy the credits.
Yes.
And that would be, I think the federal credit can go to any corporation.
It can, exactly, yeah.
So
and there's a very robust market around it, and so this credit could fit right into that infrastructure that already exists if we were to change those rules.
At the last meeting, the Kentucky Housing Authority, and at our last meeting, I'm on their policy committee, we talked about how homelessness has increased 11%. I run a homeless shelter. That's why we are expanding to double our capacity, because we need that. So I do think that this committee on low-income housing has also a direct impact on the homeless.
Yes.
And over the past few years, we have been full the whole time, and that's why we are extending ourselves in debt to do this. And without these credits that you're talking about, we would not be able to do it. So I think I just wanted to alert people that it is available to nonprofits. So thank you all for your presentation.
Thank you, Representative Decker.
Thank you. Representative Watkins.
I'll be brief too. I think I have overstayed my welcome on questions, but I really love this topic, and I'm appreciative of talking to you all today. I am in full support from what I think I understand about making them fungible and transferable throughout, or getting rid of the buckets altogether. I'm going to talk about homeowners for a second. I live in Old Louisville. It has the largest collection of Victorian homes. Last time I checked, I know in the state, but I also heard that we rank pretty high in the country.
Just outside of San Francisco, sir.
Just outside of San Francisco? Okay. Well, in that regard, talking about transferability, in your mind, do you consider that transferability outside of nonprofits and such also to be eligible for homeowners as well? I mean, being that if we combine the pots, my concern is that we would have this sort of overabundance of commercial projects that would beat out the little guy, for lack of better words.
Yeah.
And smaller homeowners. The reason why homeowners don't use this stuff is because it's complicated, and nobody has the amount of money to pay the attorneys to develop all these plans and such. And there's very little technical assistance out there, from what I know. So, can you speak to that at all for me?
Yeah. There's a wonderful gentleman at the Heritage Council named Marty who is holding up the technical assistance for the whole state on his shoulders, and yes, God bless him. This is why I suggested we put homeowners first in line. So if we got rid of the pots, instead of saying first come, first serve, or everyone just gets the same apportionment, you would say homeowners would get their full eligible credits, and then what's left over gets split between the commercial properties. I would be remiss to say that it would be better to just get rid of the cap altogether. Mm-hmm. And so we had last year about $115 million of credits that projects were eligible for. This year, they said that it didn't reach $100 million, so it seems to be fluctuating back and forth. And we're not talking about insane demand, but it does. It would put us in an even higher echelon of other states who have best practices if you remove the cap, because it then becomes a by right issue. So if you check all of the boxes, if you meet all the eligibility requirements, you will get your 20% tax credit or 30% tax credit if you're a homeowner. You don't have to wait until June to find out how many other people wanted it and what slice of the pie you got.
Yeah, and at the risk of overindulging, I mean, the process and the projects it's the same if you're doing a small homeowner to a multi-million-dollar commercial project. And it's just not apples and apples to me. I wish there was like a small project carve out or something. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Some states do a small project carve out, or they increase the amount of credit available for small projects. I think one of the key barriers is the technical assistance part. That's why I mentioned that you have to register on the National Register of Historic Places, which is a bear. And Marty at the Heritage Council very kindly told me, he said, it takes on average about 40 hours. And who has that kind of time, right? And so I think this is where my comment about making sure that the Heritage Council has the support they need to be able to help homeowners and help folks across the Commonwealth access the credits that they have rights to, I think is a really important piece of the puzzle.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that 40-hour number is shocking. And if there was something that we could, I don't know if that's something that we can do to ease even the residential side of that. That would be something to look at. Yeah, I'm not sure. But this has been great. Thank you all so much for your testimony. Does anyone else have anything?
Motion adjourned.
Thank you.
Our next meeting is August 25th.